Welcome everybody to today's class. Try and get that light off the board. Today we're looking at Spinoza and we're looking at his book called The Ethics. So if you're here for an English lesson, I'm afraid there's not going to be one at the moment. This is looking at Spinoza's ethics, so it's a philosophy, not really a class, but perhaps a discussion. I hope you can see all of the board there. It seems to be a little bit coming forward, so I'll try and move it back a bit. Should do this at the start really, but so if you've been following this series, you'll realise that I'm a big fan of this book. It's a book which is about ethics, and really in the first three parts that we've already looked at, he doesn't mention ethics much. It really is in these last two chapters where we get into the meat of Spinoza's argument about what does it mean to be ethical, what does it mean to be good. And what does it mean to be evil? So one thing to remember right at the beginning is that Spinoza claims that nothing is good or evil in itself. Nothing is perfect or perfect taken on its own, in itself. Things are only perfect or imperfect, good or evil, according to some kind of standard. And he makes the point that if you've got a project or something like that, maybe you're a writer, maybe you're an artist, then you have a plan for your work, and the closer the work finishes to what you planned, the more perfect it is, the better it is. And so what he's saying is, if we're going to split actions up into good and evil, we need some kind of standard. Now the standard that Spinoza suggests is usefulness, which brings him very close to the utilitarians. I've mentioned this before. But he claims that something is good when it's useful to us, to an individual, and something is bad when it's not useful. Now, what exactly does this mean? Well, remember that Spinoza believes that our essence involves persevering, it involves the will to carry on. And so we have to obey our essence. We have to act according to our nature for things to be useful to us. It's very useful to us to persevere. Yeah, and that's the idea what he means by usefulness. We ought to be doing things which are good for ourselves, which help us persevere. That's what's good for us. And secondly, which enables us to become more active, more powerful. Remember that for Spinoza, virtue is power, which is the same as knowledge. And knowledge means having correct ideas, having true ideas, having adequate ideas. And this is all the same as being active, not passive, where other things control you, but active, where you have an effect in the real world and it comes from you, it doesn't come from anywhere else. So the ways that you can act in the world increase as you become more virtuous, more powerful, more knowledgeable. You also get more freedom. Now we'll talk about freedom in a moment, because we don't mean more free will. Spinoza doesn't believe in that. But you do get more freedom in the sense of free from a lack of power. You become more powerful. That sense, you become more free. You're free of things which are holding you back. You're free of things which are controlling you. And of course, he means the emotions. And you become more perfect. Now, notice that all of this line really, it's pleasure. This is what pleasure is. Pleasure is actually passing to a state of greater perfection. Pleasure is becoming more powerful. Pleasure is being able to affect the world in a greater number of ways. And in this sense, you're more virtuous. You're more capable of affecting other bodies and other minds. That is what he means by more powerful. He means you're more capable of affecting other things out there in the universe. Now, what does he mean by free? Because clearly, for Spinoza, a free man is a good man, and this is just an ideal. He makes it very clear that that nobody is only active, nobody is only free. He says it's impossible to only be active, and this is because if you were only active, if you always caused other things to happen, but you weren't affected by other things, you would never die, you'd never get sick, you'd be immortal, and this isn't the case. Remember that Spinoza really dislikes the idea that man is something different from the rest of nature. That's not correct. Man is just like the rest of nature. And just like the rest of nature, which involves finite things, man is finite. And for this reason, there's always something bigger than you, stronger than you, that will be the end of you. And there's always something stronger in infinite nature, in everything there is. And for this reason, there's no such thing as a perfectly free man. But we do our best to work towards this ideal, and this is what Spinoza means by virtue. But what does he mean, a free man? He doesn't believe in free will, but he does believe that man is free, just as God or nature is free. And so how is God or nature free? Well, he finds it particularly ridiculous that some theologians at the time were arguing about whether God could have done something else. He could have created something else, not our universe, but something completely different. And because he's all powerful and all knowing, sure, maybe he is capable of creating something else. Now, if that were the case, God would have free will. He'd be able to choose what he creates and say, no, not that, I'll create this. That Spinoza finds this idea totally ridiculous. So remember that he doesn't just say that man is incapable of free will. He says that even God, even nature, the universe, is totally incapable of free will. He on the other hand, he does suggest that God or nature, or whatever you want to call it, the cosmos, he does suggest that it is free in the sense that it determines itself. It's self-caused, it's active, it causes itself, nothing else causes it. So it's not determined by other things, it's not passive. And in this sense, that God or nature is free. It's here by the necessity of its own being. And people can become free in the same sense. Not in the sense of being able to do anything that they want without being punished, which I think is what a lot of people think about when they think about free will. Just being able to do anything you like and not being responsible, not being held accountable for your actions. No, that's not what he thinks is the virtuous man. The virtuous man is the free man in the sense that he controls his passions. So a free man is all about control. That's something to remember. Self-control. Freedom comes from self-control, perhaps paradoxically or something like that. Freedom comes from control, from self-control, controlling your passions. Now, one thing that Spinoza really looks down on is excessive love. He's a very intelligent man, and he sees that love is not always a positive thing. He understands that love can be taken to excess, to the point that desires get excessive, and this is not a virtuous man. This is not a free man. This is a man enslaved to his passions, if he's showing excessive love. So a free man will have no excessive love or desire. His desires will be modest. They'll be controlled, they'll be moderate desires. So he's not a hedonist. Yeah, that's one thing to remember. He has no hate for evil. And this is because nothing is good or evil in itself. And so he has no hate for evil, only an understanding of evil and an understanding of the necessity of evil. An understanding of the necessity of things which are bigger than him, stronger than him, an understanding of that necessity. And this is really important because this is how we become virtuous. We understand the causes of our emotions, and that, in that sense, we become virtuous. Because the more we understand about our emotions, the more likely we will be able to control them. We can control our emotions when we understand the causes of those emotions. And this is why the understanding is perhaps the most important part of the mind. It's the part of the mind which is active. It's the part of the mind that makes us more powerful. And it makes us more powerful because it shows us the causes of our emotions. It can recognize the necessity of events. And so the free man will experience no hatred, no jealousy, none of those negative emotions which really spring from hatred and which really spring from pain. And remember that pain is the opposite of virtue. Pain comes from a lack of power. Pain comes from poorly formed ideas. It comes from being passive and not being active, being controlled by the external world and not by your inner nature. And pain involves bondage in the sense of the opposite of freedom, in the sense of slavery. Because you're enslaved to your emotions over which you have no control. So no hatred, no sadness. This is another very important point in Spinoza. He believes that sadness is something which the free man will not have, which the virtuous man will not feel. He particularly dislikes morbidity and obsession with negative things like death, disease, sickness, or how awful people are. He believes that this is not the life of the free man, or the life of the just man, or the life of the virtuous man. A virtuous man, a free man, feels overjoyed and blessed. He feels this pleasure at becoming more powerful all the time, and not pain. And this is why he doesn't focus on the negative. He's also not an ascetic. He'll enjoy food, he'll enjoy drink, he'll enjoy entertainment. Not excessively, but to a modest amount, he will enjoy the things which are good for him. Spinoza understands that food is good for us, good food, healthy food of various types, and drink is good for us. So Spinoza was not an ascetic. He didn't think we had to live in a painful way or constantly denying ourselves things which are good for our body. If it's good for the body, it's good for the mind as well. Okay, there's no hope or fear that the free man feels. He gives a really brilliant analysis of hope and fear and shows how they are totally opposite each other. He says that fear is worry or anxiety about a future or past event, and hope is the opposite of worry or anxiety. It's being in doubt about some future event. So when you hope for something, you're afraid that it won't happen. And when you're afraid of something, you hope that it won't happen. And in that sense, they're totally opposite each other, and they're never good. They're used actually to manipulate you. People will use your hopes and your fears to manipulate you. And unfortunately, that's the case. And so no hope or fear for the free man. He really disliked, Spinoza, the way religion was using the hope of an afterlife or the fear of an afterlife as a way of manipulating people. Okay, and lastly, he pursues his own self-interest, which is exactly the same as pursuing the interests of society and the state. Now, this is because Spinoza thought that there's nothing more useful to us than living under a state, living under a system of laws, having a police force, being able to live understanding that you're not going to be robbed, or it's unlikely that you'll be attacked or robbed, thanks to the laws of the land. And so he's very much in favour of the state, Spinoza. He's not an anarchist, he's not an idiot. He realises that a free man can only live a happy and content life in a state, or that it's certainly helpful to each one of us to live in a state. And I think he's right here. And he's famous for saying man is to man a god, and he means man really gets more powerful. And I agree with him. We become more powerful when we live in a state. If you live all on your own in the mountains, your power is much less, generally speaking. It's by living together and working together that we become more powerful, and that we become more able to control ourselves and more able to do a large number of different things. So if we go a little bit further then, we can see that learning and education and understanding is something very important for Spinoza. And it's because when we learn, when we understand, we're increasing the power of activity. We're becoming capable of more and more and more things. And this is clear with education, that we become capable of more and more and more things. So I'm going to have to rush a little bit now because I've got a student coming any second. But I want to make it clear that only emotions can overcome other emotions. And Spinoza says this because he realizes that sometimes we see the right path. For example, I'm a smoker and I understand that it's not good to smoke, that it's not good for my body, it's not any good for my mind either. And so I understand that. And yet nonetheless, I still choose to smoke. And he recognizes that it's not knowledge of good and evil or of right and wrong or of virtue and vice. It's not knowledge that will make you act virtuously. Only emotions can overcome other emotions. And so we need active emotions to overcome our passive emotions. Simple knowledge will not do. And I think he's absolutely right again. With the example of smoking, you know, it doesn't matter that I know that it's bad for me, I still choose to smoke. And it's really because there's no strong emotion taking over and telling me to quit. And I think he's right. And he has a lot of advice on how to control the emotions in part 4 and part 5, because he recognizes that firstly, seeing that certain events are necessary will help us control our emotions, and simply not dwelling on, but thinking carefully about our emotions will help us. Okay, lastly, he does say that the mind is eternal. Now, I don't want anyone to think that he's starting to argue in favour of an afterlife, because that wouldn't be true. He's actually saying that true understanding is eternal. And he means here, like the understanding of Euclid, take geometry. That understanding is eternal. It's still here with us. Euclid's dead and we still know all of those things that he wrote down and he passed on to us. And in that sense, that understanding that he came to is eternal. That's the way I understand Spinoza when he says that the mind is eternal. He doesn't mean all parts of the mind, he only means understanding, and he definitely doesn't mean the the imagination or the memory. They're not eternal, they die with the mind. So don't think he's arguing in favour of immortality. He's not. He's simply saying that what we understand, what we learn is eternal and immortal. And the more we understand that, the more immortal or eternal we become while we're alive. And when we die, all of that understanding remains eternal, even though our body doesn't. Okay, I'm sorry, I've got to stop here, even though I want to say a little bit more, but I just have a student waiting. So thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you all soon.